Hello and welcome. A changing world, and it's changing faster and faster. Organizations need to change and adapt. The pace of change is increasing consistently since the Industrial Revolution and is getting frightening levels over the past few years. You need, as an organization, to be able to innovate and change at least as fast in order to continue it. This is a workshop. So even though it is a recording of a workshop and not the workshop itself, I'm still going to use the PowerPoint presentations, go over the Menti questions and interactions, and the Miro whiteboard worksheets that were created during the live event. I will also be sharing the results of the various bits and pieces and answering any remaining questions that I found in the chat. So first thing was to ask participants to introduce themselves through Menti, which they very kindly did. I explained that Menti allowed to answer the question, but also to ask questions and to make comments as we proceeded. So the first question asked was, where are you today? And people clicked on the map accordingly. So with a few international people, but mostly in the UK, as was expected. What is the role? So these were the answers received when asked what was their role at work. There was a general background, then moving into the actual information. We need to innovate, so innovate requires creativity, intuition, curiosity, and imagination. We're born with these in ample supply. But then we are taught in school and in the workplace to replace them and trust in what people have done before. Facts are more important than imagination. Data is more important than curiosity and creativity, which is a shame. We need to try and find out ways of making it happen, because people already have too many excuses not to innovate. And they're all blaming somebody else, don't have time, risk-averse culture, need to meet our results, lack customer insight, ideas get stuck, we don't have a clear definition of what creativity is, we're all pulling in different directions and so on. So the next question I had logically for my participants was, what do you hope to take home? What do you hope to get out of this event? The answers I got were here. Something interesting, find out something, liberate thinking, get some new ideas, know more about the session, and challenge my prejudices, which is a good state, always a good thing to do. When talking about innovation, according to most business schools, it's a drastic process of change, and it occurs over a very short period of time. So can you actually change culture? Can you encourage innovation in people? One of the challenges is that you can only change the culture of an organization if the people are willing to participate. But they will only be willing to participate if the culture encourages them to participate. Going back a few years, Aristotle defined the three artistic proofs for convincing people that something needed to be done, that change was necessary. Ethos, the ethical credibility of the person recommending the change. Pathos, the emotional desire to accept and implement the change. Logos, the facts, the data, the rationale, the logic as to why the change would be needed. There's a fourth one that is often added in, which is kairos, which is selecting the right time, the opportune, the critical moment in order to make the change happen. You'll need all of these if you're going to be successful. So what I'm going to cover within the following presentation I'm going to talk about the traditional analysis in the Western world, talk about the cultural ecosystem, identifying the creative people who are willing and able to do the job and make the changes, the difficulty in balancing creativity with business needs, baselining the culture, understanding the constraints that are impacting the change, and then we'll go into planning and designing the change and making things happen. We'll start with analysis and change and how to make change, how to analyze things. The traditional Western approach to analysis is to take things apart and analyze them individually, believing that if all the components work, the whole system will work. It's a bit like the surgeon who confirms that your heart is in perfect working order, your liver, kidneys, lungs are all in perfect working order. The only reason you are dead is because the surgeon removed them for analysis. This was completed by Newton's research in mathematics and the mindset to include observation and measurement and mathematical principles. He helped us understand the concept of basic unchanging laws of the universe, laws that will never move. Unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, he included in those basic laws of the universe the Christian understanding of divine creation and design. Later on, we come across Charles Darwin, who threw in the concept of randomness, explaining that life comes from a succession of random genetic mutations, which gives an advantage that is attractive and therefore encourages reproduction and survival. Other mutations are accidental, are not attractive, and therefore die out very rapidly. Then everything was changed as Eisenstein, Bohr, Dirac, Jordan, Planck, Einstein started quantifying the uncertainty principles that are demonstrated within quantum mechanics. For instance, the concept that a light-emitting electron is a wave until it is measured and becomes a particle. This opened up the understanding that the future is deterministic. The future is probabilistic. It is not deterministic or random, as frequently thought previously. It also helps us understand how we can believe two incompatible things at the same time. The next big change was the concept of ecosystems, which is more or less in contradiction to the original deconstructive analytics. The idea in an ecosystem is that not only is the whole system dependent on every component, but every component only works because the whole system is there to make it work. This was beautifully illustrated a few years ago by Yellowstone National Park in the US, where they introduced 14 wolves at great expense, and the wolves made the deer and elk start moving, which made them stop eating the willows and other trees as soon as they appeared. So the trees could flourish, which allowed songbirds to come back, beavers, eagles, badgers, foxes came back. The trees in the beaver dams stabilized riverbanks, lowered the water temperature, and allowed freshwater fish to come back, giving an additional visitor revenue of $35 million per year to Yellowstone National Park for an original $30 million investment. The reason I need you to understand this is because you need to understand that culture is an ecosystem. Society is an ecosystem. It's not a collection of individuals. It is a collection of relationships. It is a collection of communication channels. You are defined not by your physical body. You are defined by the communications you have, by the relationships you have, externally as well as internally. Did you know, for instance, that if you are healthy and fit, you still have approximately 30% more bacterial cells in your body than you have human cells. Over 50% of your DNA comes from viral mutations and infections. Okay? A human being is defined by the ecosystem and the relationship that is played between all of these elements. And this means that you, as the product of your ancestry, your education, your experience, is completely unique. You have got visibility and understanding over things that nobody else can see because of who you are, because of your uniqueness, because of your individuality. Now, when we start forming a team, we need to identify the convergence points. Where are the things that might be creative and interesting? How can I innovate? By bringing together the knowledge and the understanding of the various people within my team. If you don't have innovation, you are going to remain dependent on people giving you work, which will largely be work of fixing and maintenance. And soon your routine work will be replaced by artificial intelligence, by robotics, by other new techniques. You will not be relevant to society in the future. Change is indispensable. And if your team is not able to identify these overlaps, these points of convergence, of entanglement, then you will not have the creativity you need in order to be innovative. In fact, I will go as far as to say you don't have a team. You just have a group of people who happen to be working on the same thing. But if you're going to change this, if you're going to change the way people think, if you're going to try to modify the culture, you're going to need all the usual change management aspects of design and communication and strategy and process. But more important than that, you are going to need a good understanding and implementation of psychology and sociology. Because if you don't have that careful attention to the psychology and the sociology of what you're trying to change, you are just going to move around what already exists, sometimes making it incomprehensible and frequently breaking the connections that you have, potentially even losing the key people who will lose interest, and you lose your relationships, the information, the data, the knowledge, and the co-workers. So you need to understand this, because this information, these connections are the built-in wisdom of your team. They are the things that allow you to understand what it is that you're trying to do. And the wisdom means that based on data, knowledge, experience, information, and so on, you have got an understanding that allows you to make the right decision, an efficient decision, rapidly, even though it is something you have never seen before. Now, if you want to change things, what is it you believe are the key things that you would want to implement? I gave the participants a list of items that could be seen as potential changes, and in this workshop these are the choices they made. Others included things such as communication. The number one thing is organize informal discussions and brainstorming sessions. Get people to talk to one another. Get people to identify what their colleagues know and understand so that they can start working it through. Changing a culture is a challenge because you don't want to lose the good things. Across the world, national cultures are largely defined between loose cultures and tight cultures. Loose cultures are the everything go. If you want to do something different, if you want to do something slightly strange, that's a good thing. We don't encourage whistleblowing, we encourage thinking out the box. In a tight culture, there's a good structure. People know what they're supposed to be doing, what they should not be doing. And if you do something that doesn't fit into the structure, whistleblowing is encouraged. Over the past couple of years, tight cultures were very good at locking down areas and stopping the spread of the pandemic. Loose culture nations, on the other hand, were quick to develop the vaccines and the changes that were needed. A different approach to this are the 6 dimensions of culture as identified by Gert Hofstede. He identifies 6 different dimensions: collectivism, power distance, femininity, uncertain avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. And every country is then measured on this. How good are you? How important is individual or community? How easy is it for people at the bottom of society to speak to the leader? Is it a man allowed to cry, or is he out to fight the world and bring home while the woman stays home and takes care? All these different items can be measured and were measured by Gert Hofstede, and he placed countries, national identities and cultures on a scale from this, from collectivist Guatemala to individualist USA, and so on. For information, because most participants are in the UK, this was the British scores for these various elements. The next section I would want to focus on is identifying who are the people who are creative. If you want to encourage creativity, if you want to encourage innovation, you want to identify those shining stars that are going to make things happen. And you want to also identify the areas where something is needed. How can we facilitate communication? How can we come over these crossroads and make things happen? Identifying creative people, I am looking for people who like to explore, to think creatively, who are willing to share information, communicate their ideas and challenge their management if necessary, but also willing to listen and accept the team's decision afterwards. Creativity is basically just having an original idea. That's not enough. We want innovation, which means the ability to change those ideas into actions and outcomes. We want to do something with them. So I defined 3 characteristics of innovative people that I would like to locate within an organization. I want people who are curious, who want to find things, discover new experiences. I want people who are engaged, willing to share their discoveries and ideas, propose different ways of doing things, and people who are integrated. They're respected by their team, listen to them, and they listen back to the team and accept the team's decisions. Now, as soon as we start talking about finding this kind of people, we start talking about personality traits and therefore various personality tests. There are different types. I like the Big Five because the Big Five covers a wide range of things, from the original 5 to 3 subsets of each one of these 5 elements. You're not in or out. You're not extrovert or introvert. You are on a scale somewhere from 0 to 100. And it allows you to identify your strengths, your weaknesses, where you should try to focus your attention in the future. By measuring these things, you're expected to evolve. This is not static. This is an evolutionary personality test. So I've taken these different characteristics and structured them into what they mean with regard to curious, engaged, and integrated. And I can then use the results to measure the outcome and decide what is your total score in each one of these areas. Now when I see these scores, I'm thinking, okay, I've got two people here, very different, Anna and Bob. What would be the job that I would recommend for them based on this alone? Well, very rapidly, I can see that Anna is well integrated, 345, but not curious. I think she would probably be a good manager or a good team leader. Bob, on the other hand, is very curious with a score of 295, but is not really engaged with the team. So he probably needs a more solitary job, like architect or designer. Of course, other skills and experience should come into play. This is not the only thing. The Big Five is there. It's available. You can take the test free of charge. Be objective when you do it, and might help you understand where to focus your own self-improvement energy. The other thing that I do when I'm conducting a organizational therapy session is ask people to fill out questionnaires in which they've got a number of things to ask about how they feel about their organization, but also how they react and how well their colleagues think of them. This information allows me to put together charts such as this one, in which I can see that in this organization, this is a real outcome from business. There's generally consensus, expressed opinions, team listens, I'm respected. There's a good team atmosphere. People listen to one another, work together. Access to information and clear priorities seem to be a problem. Right tools and participating in change are not satisfactory. And I'm thinking, looking at this, that I need more management participation. And specifically, I want the management to learn to listen to their team, to understand what it is they need in order to do their job correctly, but also talk to their team so as to help them understand why the priorities are there. So I've got a clear direction of improvement here. Another chart I produce is this one. Each bubble here represents an individual. The higher they are on it, the more integrated they are. The further right they are, the more engaged they are. It is relatively normal to find a diagonal here. People who are less integrated are less engaged, and vice versa. However, what you see also is the size of the bubbles. There's a big green bubble. The big green bubble shows someone who is very curious, very much interested in discovering new things, but is not well integrated or engagement. This is someone who does not share their ideas, does not speak up, and feels that they're not being listened to. In the top right-hand corner, you've got a brown bubble, which is relatively small, so these are not someone who is interested in curious things and discovering new things and innovation, but however is very much integrated and engaged. This is probably the team leader who knows this is the way we've always done things, and this is the way you should do. You'll notice a lot of the bubbles are similar size. There's a cluster of things, and that is a problem which comes from the hiring process. So if I consider everything there is to know about a topic and everything that I know about that topic as an expert, I do have to come to the conclusion that actually I only know very little of it. But then when I'm building a team, I'm going to be tempted to hire people who fit in. So I'm going to get people who probably have the same education, the same background, the same understanding of things, the same ideas. And I'm therefore going to end up with a small group of redundant, duplicated knowledge of the same small section of the topic. I want to try instead to hire a team of rebels, a team that presents a large variety of knowledge, that comes from different backgrounds, that has got different experience built into them, so that I can cover as much of the topic as possible. And I do understand that over time there is a risk of assimilation in the team, which means we will lose something of this. Netflix proposes, this is from the book by Reed Hastings, who's the CEO and founder of Netflix, says he encourages staff to make decisions without going up through hierarchy and getting permission. Make your own decision, make your own choices. However, you are expected to understand the context, to get feedback from people with different perspectives, and be aware of the options. You need to be as varied as possible in that. The Tech Talent Charter is a British charity which seeks to improve the number of women and minorities in technical and engineering jobs, which I would also recommend you have a look at. So now I've got my creative people, I've got my team of rebels. I do need to form them into a team from a group. That means I need to start trying to channel their creativity and their innovations in something that will support one another. If I'm looking at a sports team, every individual has different skills, has got different abilities, and they build on each other. They've got a strategy that works together. They understand what their goals are, and the individual is a winner because the team wins. There are two things that I like looking at in order to facilitate this. The Sophia framework, which structures technical people based on their experience, based on their knowledge, based on their education, and the jobs, what's the experience, the knowledge, the capabilities, the skills needed for a given job. And of course, I will also encourage my own principle of Vitruvian quality, which is assisting you in identifying the clear structure that needs to be implemented, giving you consistent communication to understand the scopes, the limits, the possibility of both creativity and engineering within the organization. The idea behind this is to identify a clear definition of quality of expectations and make sure that the vision is understandable to every individual within the organization. The next thing we need to cover is how to balance this. So we're going to talk about the balancing act of getting together the creative, innovative aspect and your business needs. So the biggest challenge you will find in the implementation of creativity is the need to allow for mistakes. Your big idea doesn't work in reality. It can't be done for whatever reason. How does management react? How do the people behind the spreadsheets respond? If the idea was good but difficult to implement, they'll seek out the right tools to help you do it next time. Do they congratulate you for having tried, welcome the lesson learned? Do they blame and punish? What is the correct attitude to have? Of course, your idea may have cost time and money and effort and amounted to a net financial loss. If you're going to be blamed for the waste, you will quickly give up on creativity and quickly return to being a zombie doing as you're told. One of the keys to identifying how to react to various ideas and issues and problems is understanding how complicated or complex or easy it's going to be. And for that, I strongly recommend and enjoy using the Cynefin model, which is a model to help you identify the type of problem you are encountering before you start considering how to solve it. So it largely divides your problems into 4 big categories and gives you definitions and pathways for each one. The first one is the obvious aspect. It's an obvious problem. We've done it many times before. We know we've got the best practice. So I can very quickly identify that this is a software defect, for example, and we can go in and correct the code and release it, and we've done it many times before. That's not an issue. So I can very quickly do this. This is where we find the best practices, rapid responses. The complicated aspect is where you've got governing constraints. That means that you've got constraints that none of them made this happen, but they're all there to push you in the right direction. So as a specialist, as an experienced individual, I can start to look back and say, all right, this is why it happened. I can do the analysis, I can find out what is the right response and how to proceed from this. The complex issues, slightly more difficult, they have got enabling constraints. That means that these various events did not make this happen. However, we can go back and identify why this happened. And if that had something in the past had not happened, then we've got a whole succession of events that would not have created this problem. And finally, we have got the chaotic events where there's no constraint, just something happens. Shit happens, you got to live with it. You probably got to react fairly quickly to find a solution, but you know it's not a permanent solution. You're going to have to start working on this and try and find a completely new way of solving your problems. So when we are talking about culture and culture change, first thing we need to consider is this obvious, complicated, complex, or chaotic. You need to identify this to start identifying the right approach that you might want to take. And it becomes very quickly obvious that because we're talking about humans and because you are uniquely characterized by your past, your experience, your history, it has to be a complex problem. Machines are complicated. I can take apart a car and a qualified engineer who knows how to do this, who's got the experience, can put it back together and make it work again. People problems, culture problems, we're all reacting based on some instinct that was built into us through a different pathway. And so we've got a complex approach to things which are a lot more difficult to manage. However, they do have enabling constraints. They are things that enable something to happen. Of course, some people are chaotic. It's maybe best to leave that alone. But what matters here is understanding that the complexity of the approach means that traditional system thinking will not work. Traditional system thinking is saying, this is where I want to be, this is what I want to achieve, and it doesn't work because it's too optimistic, it's too ideal. What we need is to implement complexity thinking. And complexity thinking means I'm going to establish a general direction of where I want to go, and then focus on where I am and deciding what can I do, what do I have to do, what should I do to start moving from here generally in the right direction. To help me in this, I have got the cynics, the people who are going to challenge me, who are going to ask me the stupid questions, who are going to tell me why it doesn't matter. And these are valuable resources because cynics, skeptics will challenge you, will ask you questions, will tell you why it's not going to work. You need to listen to them. You need to ask them to define the right approach, how they would do it if your approach isn't going to work. And so listen to them, respond, adapt, and adopt. But the first thing we're going to do is we need to identify the general direction. If I want to go from A to B, I need to understand what A looks like, and I need to understand what B should look like. I can then start deciding what are the intermediate steps or thresholds that I need to achieve in order to get there. Once I've established these various stopping points, these various milestones, I can then put in place a monitoring and controlling system. Now, as said, because it's complex, you cannot identify the endpoint, but what you need to identify is what kind of endpoint do you want to see. The two buildings I'm showing here were built just a few years apart. One is in Art Nouveau, and the other one is Bauhaus. They are completely different. They've got nothing in common other than the fact that they're both buildings. And so understanding what kind of approach you want to have is critical in order to get to achieve it. So probably the first question you need to ask is, what is important for your organization? What are the characteristics, what are the cultural aspects you would want to see within your business? You cannot have them all. You cannot be rigorous in respecting the process while at the same time being creative. You cannot be a rule breaker and a rule follower. You cannot be risk or error tolerant while at the same time demanding people get it correct the first time. And so the first part of the workshop here was to move into a Miro workboard, a whiteboard, which is an interactive whiteboard that allows the participants to start identifying how they are going to implement things. Using a few very simple principles of whiteboard and post-it notes, there was the option to write down what are the things you would want to see within your organization, catching as much as possible. This is the outcome of the first exercise. So we asked people to decide what it is, okay? We've got allow for mistakes, rule breakers, free thinkings, positive deviance, and so on. So people are looking for a number of characteristics that they would like to see in their organization. What are the priorities that they want to see? Next, having established where we want to go, we need to understand where we are. What is the baseline from which we are going to move? So I do something which I call organizational therapy, which involves a number of very confidential interviews and discussions with individuals and teams throughout the whole organization, capturing their frustrations, their concerns, their desires, and trying to see how this matches up to the senior management vision, needs, mission statements, and so on. Are we actually doing the right thing, and what is stopping it from doing it? In order to establish the baseline, you need to listen to the people at the front, the people who are doing the work, the people who are creating what your customers actually want to get. Listen to them, watch them, learn from them. The stories people tell you, so not just complaints, but the stories. What is it that you would tell your friends, your spouse about working here? They will tell you stories. They will help you explain what it feels like to work in these conditions. What are their problems, but also what are their desires? I want to identify what is not working well, what is slowing people down, what is creating problems, what is making your life more difficult, what are the consumables, the tools you are using that are creating issues, why have we got errors, mistakes, defects, and so on. But I also want to find out what is working well. If we change things, if we change the culture, if we move things about, what are the things you don't want to lose? What is really important? And so we went back to our Menti whiteboard and we started identifying in the pink post-it notes what are the problem areas, the things that are causing issues, in green the things that we would like to keep. Okay, there's a whole number of issues here, all kinds. So it's targets, power pyramid, politics being played, individuality and ego. Two sides of the same coin, perhaps. We want to reduce the ego, we want to improve the individuality aspect, backstabbing, all kinds of issues that we want to try to solve. Having identified the problems we want to get rid of, the end game which we want to achieve, we're now going to start looking at the constraints. Because you remember, it's not an easy thing. We're in a complex environment. We're going to have to consider all kinds of different aspects, including psychology, sociology, and so on. You need to understand that culture is not something you can just change. Culture is something you need to influence. You need to help channel the constraints so that you start moving in the right direction. Various basic principles: identify the constraints that are going to help you, identify the constraints that are creating problems, and nudge these, just change them slightly, slowly, making sure that things start pushing in the right direction. Identify the constraints that are blocking changes, identify the constraints that are facilitating changes, strengthens the one and weaken the others. For example, a while back I was asked to do the exercise on staff motivation and identified on the whiteboard, this took me about half an hour to put together, all the constraints that are holding back. What are the things that are stopping us from progressing? What are the things that are creating problems? Consider on the other side, what are the consequences of this? Real consequences, not just feeling, emotional, touchy-feely aspects, but real consequences, and what can be done about them in order to resolve the issues identified. And having this all put together on one board allows to understand fairly rapidly what are the issues that we want to try to resolve. So let me give you an example practice here. I would like people to do their work correctly the first time. What does that mean? Why are they not doing it right the first time? Well, there's a number. They're being pressured to meet deadlines. Because sales is selling more they can do. They've got unrealistic schedules. We're pushed by short-term profits. We've got bad estimates that support. There's a feeling that that's good enough for now because the job to be done is not well defined. Requirements and expectations are badly expressed in natural language. Vision and mission statements are not clearly explained and implemented. So those are the reasons why we're not doing it right the first time. What are the consequences of not doing right? Well, we're producing substandard quality. And that means we've got to spend more time repairing and fixing. That's additional costs and further delays. We've got unhappy customers, reputation, market share, demotivated staff, which is leading to absenteeism, stressed staff, which demotivates but also increases sick leave. We've got increased staff turnover, losing competent people, additional costs. of hiring new people and bringing up to speed. So the next exercise we're going to do is try to identify all the constraints that have an impact on what you are trying to achieve. There are a lot of constraints. There are a lot of reasons why things are working well or badly. And we're going to try to identify as many as possible of them. Each one might lead you to something else. Okay, so there's a spread that starts opening up. During the exercise, this was the outcome that we got to. So because of a technical problem at this time, we didn't get as many constraints as I would have liked to see, but we got quite a few. Once you have this list of constraints, you've got to decide what you're going to do about them. There are various options. Okay, there are some things that you can impact. This is your responsibility. You've got the authority to do it. You are the person who's best placed to do something about it. There are some that you can influence. There's nothing you can do directly, but you know who can do it. You have a guy. You can probably talk them into doing something. There are things where you've got very little influence. You need to keep an eye on them. You keep to maintain your interest, make sure that things are happening correctly. And there are some which you do best to ignore. And what you're going to then do is identify, make sure that you are working in the right direction. So your goal should be captured within what you can impact, influence, and interest. The ignore bits we'll throw away, we'll ignore them. Okay, we'll just focus on impact, influence, and interest. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we are going to look at all the constraints that we have identified and start classifying them accordingly to, are these things I can impact, influence, interest, or are they things I should just throw away? And so with this, we moved into the next phase of the whiteboard, which has not been completed during the workshop, where I'm going to start moving over my post-it notes and identify which ones fit where. What are the things that I can influence? What are the things that I need to keep an eye on? What are the things that I should be ignoring? Having identified our baseline, our objectives, our constraints, and decided which are those that we want to act on first, we can now start planning the next steps. You need a plan, you've got all the details, you need to fit it all together, but you need to make sure that the components work together. We need to get our brilliant new ideas designed, quantified, developed. We've got to put this all together now. The idea of constraints is that we need to identify the constraints on the system. We've done that. We need to decide how to exploit the constraints. So you need to say, all right, this is something I can influence. The next question is, how can I influence this? How can I actually impact this constraint and strengthen or weaken it, depending if it's a positive or a negative? I can then prioritize this constraint correction. This change of my constraint becomes critical to everything I'm doing. This becomes a high priority item. As the constraint gets stronger or weaker, depending if it's a positive or a negative, I can elevate them and I can start to resolve it. If a constraint disappears or if it is completely resolved, go back to step one, because there are other constraints that are now high priority. Okay? The way to do this, you've all heard and used and probably misused PDCA. So quickly going back, we've got Schubert's cyclical concept was specification, production, inspection, which Dr. Deming translated into design, production, sales and research. That was updated by the Japanese into PDCA, and then Dr. Deming created the Cycle for Learning and Improvement, which is Plan, Do, Study Act. That was further expanded then to the SAPDO, which includes the study aspect before, so determine goals and targets before you start planning things. It includes education and training, critical aspect before you start doing the work. Okay, there are different terms you can use for the different areas. And then unfortunately there is the approach that most organizations take, which is the Nike approach, which means don't plan and usually don't get any results. You need to define your goals and targets clearly. When you say you want a client-first culture, what does that actually mean? How are you going to, how will you recognize that? So try to use clearly stated objectives with verifiable data and focus on what needs to be done. Why are you changing things? First approach to this is clearly identifying the job to be done rather than the tasks to be done. What is it that people want to get out of this? What is the final objective? Okay? My favorite example of that is the skateboard. You're putting in all these clever components together. People don't want to buy titanium hardware. What they want is the experience of a skateboard. So understand what is the job you're trying to do and try to express it in terms of measurable objectives. Clarify the context. Make sure you understand it. One approach pushed by, or developed and recommended, should I say, by Tom Gilb, leads to this kind of statement. So cultural tolerance, I have got a scale, I have got the current status, and I have got a wish. These are things that I can measure today. These are things that I can decide in future how to proceed with it. When we're talking about culture, you need to consider various aspects. What are the costs? What are the values that are impacted by this? How does this correspond? What is important here? And so for each one of our constraints, before we start changing anything, let's put a cost and a value on it. So what we're going to do is identify for each constraint what are the costs, what are the values, and what are the influences. So if I come back to my earlier example here, the items listed on the far right, which I've put in a pale frame here, are all things that are relatively simple to measure. I can identify this. I can understand how to measure this. I can understand what this actually means. Loss of market share is a quantifiable thing. The cost of hiring someone is something that is known and understood. So I can start to identify what to do about this. And so we come to designing the solution. So I know what I want to do. I know why I want to do it. I understand the priorities. I now need to decide what is the right approach to try to achieve the better cultural aspect that we want. And this is where the design aspect comes in. Design is where we are going to bring together your ideal concept, your theory, your idea, whatever it means, and the technical capability. So we want to try to merge these together so as to have a clear understanding of what it means. How are we going to resolve this? Let's start working on it. So when we're talking about design, for me, design is a spiral activity. It is something that requires a number of phases that are repeated on a regular basis. It starts off with conceptualizing, questioning, diverging. Let's have a look at all the possibilities. What is the wrong way of doing this? Let's brainstorm every possible aspect. Challenge and critique them. Make sure that you can destroy each one of your ideas before it goes any further. Identify the risks related to doing this properly or improperly so that we can now start prioritizing things. And then, only then, am I going to start clearly defining the goals and planning things so that I can actually build and start converging back onto a single solution, which I can start implementing, controlling, measuring, comparing, analyze the results, and when I've done all that, I can start over again because this is a non-ending cycle. The way to go about this is we're going to do something resembling a Kanban board in which we're going to decide what do I want to initiate, what do I want to strengthen, what do I want to weaken, what do I want to eliminate. So I'm going to take an example. I have got in my case study here, the items in the right are the costs of doing things badly, of not doing things right the first time. On the left, I've got the causes. Why is this actually happening? So I'm going to take one of these causes and decide I'm going to change this. How am I going to improve estimates? Well, there are a number of things that can be done. Training. Start collecting data on past effort and tasks. Start estimating based on measurements. Put in place a better structured risk management approach, formal reviews of estimates, which focusing on what did you forget, formal reviews of work products, of work in practice, and so on. There's a number of practical activities I can do just to solve this one problem, which is one of the causes of people not doing things correctly the first time, leading to all those additional expenses. So, in conclusion, we do need to come to a conclusion at some point. Changing the culture, you need to stimulate the conversation, communication, provide appropriate resources, coordinate and align projects. Make sure you've got consistent communication at every level, and that means not just what management says you have to do, but what management does themselves. Try to understand the problems people are having and be prepared. It's not going to be easy, and if you're going to change the culture, you need to respect the culture. The people you are trying to influence are people who have got experience and knowledge. Don't throw out the good things with the bad. Okay? Ask the people who are primarily affected by this, the people who are at the front line, what they would want to see and how they would like to see it. Listen, adapt. Listen, respond, adapt, adopt. Do what you're telling other people to do. Focus on the people, okay? Culture is all about people. Train, explain, make sure you understand the issues. Or accept the people. Learn to judge the ideas that are presented to you based on their real value, not based on who said it or the manner in which it was communicated. You have got highly experienced people. Listen to their complaints, their suggestions, their desires. In quantum physics, if you observe a photon, you impact it as much as if you were to block it. The same is true with teams. If you're observing one team and not the other, you are going to influence the outcomes of both teams. Positive or negative, I don't know, but you will influence them. Once you start thinking about changing the culture, you are going to have impact on everything within the business, because everything is culture, culture is everything. This is where we reside today. When changing the culture, remember that includes you. You are the culture. You need to change. You need to adapt. You need to do it as much as everybody else. You are personally responsible. If you're in a management position, remember that your role as a manager is not to manage. It's not to bully people in doing things. It's not to tell people what they should be doing and dictating the results. It's not even to motivate people. Your role as a manager is to satisfy the innate desire people have to take pride in their work. And that is what you need to focus on. Everything else is secondary. And that brings me to the end of this presentation. Open for questions. So obviously this is a recording, so there are no questions. And so comes time for questions. Sorry that because of my computer crash I did not get a copy of the chat. I will try to find it, to see if I can find it online and answer the questions then separately in writing. I am interested, if you can, to get feedback, get some information. I'm open, of course, to have a conversation. So this QR code in the coffee cup is for a virtual coffee chat. Go and have a look at it. Go to bit.ly, OK-let's talk, and we can have a conversation. So book a time that suits you best. And of course, I am interested in getting your feedback, and I will provide you with additional facilities such as one-day free consultancy if you give me feedback within 24 hours of this, or within a week because of the problems we're having. So that's it from me. The QR codes are here. Please scan them or go to OK Feedback, or email me or telephone me, whatever you prefer. Love to continue this conversation and really would appreciate having feedback from you. Thank you, and hope that next time we don't get let down by technology as much as we did this time around. Bye for now.